Hello everyone, I'm Loremaster of Sotek, and welcome to the Chaos Dwarf Q&A. So without further ado, let's get started. Our first question comes from Eric the Red, who made our awesome intro, and you should totally check out his channel if you haven't already. Link will be in the description down below. He asks, "Hey Sotek, I'd like to know how did the Dawi learn about the existence of the Dawi Czar, and how did, if there was one, their first encounter went? Since the Dawi, who would eventually become the Dawi Czar, were cut off from the rest of the Kara's Encore during the Great Incursion, they must have surely been presumed to have perished by the rest of the dwarf people. And so I would love to know, how did these two very different empires react to each other for the first time when they encountered each other?" So here's your answer. It is true that the Dawi of the Darklands were believed to have been annihilated during the first Great Incursion of Chaos. The first meeting between the two races, however, isn't recorded, but it was likely a terribly bloody affair that took the dwarves by surprise. The Chaos Dwarfs have a bottomless hatred for their kin due to feeling abandoned, and it is said that there is no fate in the Warhammer world worse than that of a dwarf captured alive by the Dawi Czar. As such, they would have easily been the first to strike, likely destroying and enslaving minor mines in the World's Edge Mountains and Mountains of Morn. The atrocities committed by the Chaos Dwarfs are so severe, however, that the dwarves will never speak of them openly. To even ask a dwarf about them is a severe insult, and could result in injury or death for the one asking. But both races do agree on one thing. Whenever they do meet on the battlefield, there is no mercy, and total slaughter is deserved for either side. Our next question comes from Joseph Karasturi, who asks, "Besides the Black Orc Rebellion, was there any other ones?" The answer is there really weren't any of note. The minds of the Chaos Dwarves are too dangerous for any to survive and be capable of organizing rebellion other than the Black Orcs. Ogres could potentially have been a threat, but the Chaos Dwarves know better, and keep a close eye on them and keep them separated from one another to prevent collusion and rebellion. Also, Skaven managed to cause a lot of damage with their slaves who would get in by sabotaging various machines or just bringing in even plagues and diseases, so they're not allowed in anymore. The Black Orc Rebellion was truly the only one of its kind that was so successful that it nearly brought about the end of the Chaos Dwarf Empire. It was a pretty rare event. Our next question comes from Perturabo Hammer of Olympia, who asks, "What happened to the Chaos Dwarves in the end times?" So the Chaos Dwarves Empire was completely destroyed when Grimgor's Waaagh combined its might with the Ogre Horde coming from the east that had been led by Greasus Goldtooth. The two war leaders had battled for dominance, and when Grimgor successfully slew Goldtooth, the Wind of Gur, or the Wind of Beasts, entered him and he became the incarnate of beasts. One of the first things that happened afterwards was he led his massive Beast Waaagh, as it was known, of greenskins and ogres to get revenge on the Dawi Czar. Even then, the siege of Zarnagrund was a close affair. The Chaos Dwarves were untouchable behind their walls until the incredibly clever Golgfag Maneater managed to infiltrate the city with his Maneaters and opened the front gates with the help of Wurzag's magic. The ensuing battle was a slaughter, as the Chaos Dwarves were hilariously outnumbered. Some random pockets of them that were deployed around the world did survive with their parent armies, of course until the world exploded. Our fourth question comes from Marco Polish, who says, "Would you discuss some conflicts between the dwarves and the Chaos Dwarves? Also, hope you feel better soon, Sotek." I appreciate the kind words. So, the most famous conflict between the dwarves and the Chaos Dwarves was an epic confrontation that took place in Peak Pass during the Storm of Chaos, when the Herald of Archaon, Vardek Krom, this was the first attempt at the end times, before Games Workshop retconned it, attempted to march through Peak Pass. Obviously, the dwarves would not allow such a monstrous host to go unchallenged, and the combined might of Zufbar and Karak Kadrin met to thwart this legion. However, the reason Krom had gone east of the World's Edge Mountains in the first place was to gather the aid of the Chaos Dwarves of Zarnagrund. The initial engagement of the battle was the first time in an age when the Dawi Czar had marched west, and the titanic battle that took place in Peak Pass was legendary. I would highly recommend to anyone to pick up the dwarf book Grudgebearer. The 8th and final grudge detailed in the book is purely about the battle itself and the conflict between the two races. It even includes the original iteration of the Iron Demon, which was a massive creation of the Chaos Dwarfs known as the Colossus, and how the dwarves battled against such a insane creation. It's an excellent read. Of course, there are some noted other occasions that the two races clashed. Quite famously, the Chaos Lord Tarmakon was reinforced by the legions of the Black Tower, led by Drazhoath the Ashen, in an epic conflict for the very soul of Nuln, like the capital city of Wizenland. The Chaos Dwarfs fought against the Dwarves of the World's Edge Mountains once more in this epic conflict, and it was essentially the return of the Chaos Dwarfs in 8th edition, so it featured many excellent stories and details about the Chaos Dwarfs. The best place to learn about them currently is the Throne of Tarmakon campaign supplement that you can pick up online. The final one worth looking into was when a Khornate horde attacked Karak Kadrin in an event detailed in the Gotrek and Felix series in the book Road of Skulls. The massive Chaos Horde has numerous contingents as a part of it, but one of the most fearsome by far includes a Chaos Dwarf Legion. They clash against the iconic duo, and it provides some excellent personal insight into the hateful relationship between the two races, and you get dialogue from both the Chaos Dwarf and the Dwarf's perspectives on one another. There's also an excellent siege battle that features numerous of the Chaos Dwarf's war machines and even a Chaos Siege Giant. Great read, I highly recommend picking it up. Question 5 comes from Zarguz Hedwaka, who asks, how do you think the Chaos Dwarf campaign mechanics are going to work? So, essentially, I think the Chaos Dwarves are kind of going to be an amalgamation of the Dark Elf and the Skaven campaigns, probably leaning more heavily towards the Dark Elf side of things. Essentially, they're probably going to have a slave economy. It's probably going to work slightly different to the Dark Elves version in that, they're probably going to be more about going out and building up large bunches of slaves that you bring back to Zarnagrund with your armies. I'm not sure if the Chaos Dwarves are going to be able to just conquer whatever they want, or if they're going to be able to instead set up maybe farming stations when they take over settlements that allow them to get a steady income of slaves that they produce and send back to Zarnagrund. Slavery is kind of the most critical resource to the Chaos Dwarf Empire, both for its mines and in the creation of their weapons. I would expect them to have something similar to the Tomb King's creation system, where they have sacrificial forges, but the currency, instead of being like canopic jars and resources, is instead going to be those tradable resources and then slaves, or like a certain amount of blood or sacrifice, and it will allow you to create various weapons and such. I could also see that their tech tree might be funded by, like, you have time, but instead of paying gold to advance tiers, like the Chaos Tree or the some of the other races, they might instead just have a system where you have to like sacrifice a certain amount of slaves to hash it in order to unlock the next tier of the tech tree. I do expect them to have something to do with demon binding. It's likely that they're going to be one of the headline races of Game 3, along with the Demons of Chaos, which could lead to some interesting back and forth. If there is a unique resource in that game, I could see the Chaos Dwarves competing very heavily for it to be able to create more powerful war machines, or be able to bind more powerful demons into artifacts and stuff like that. I think what would be the most unique thing about them is if they were the one kind of evil faction that was heavily focused on trade and was able to gain slaves from trading with other factions. Because right now, when you look at the Dark Elves, the Skaven, and most of the Vampire Counts, Greenskins, and Warriors Chaos, Beastmen, Norska, when you look at all of them, a lot of them have the ability to trade, but they don't really have a strong impetus on trading, or like they don't really have a campaign mechanic that heavily rewards you for being a trade-heavy faction. I think the Chaos Dwarfs could really break the mold on that and be a very trade-heavy faction despite being one of the evil factions. Obviously, the Tomb Kings are a very trade-heavy faction, but they're neutral. They're not really evil, per se. Hopefully that answers your question. Those are just some ideas I have. We might go more into depth with that once the Chaos Dwarfs are officially announced as a DLC or a headliner for Game 3. Next, we go to a rather long-winded question from Raw Cauliflower, who asks the following. Hi, I hope I haven't left these questions too late. Anyway, why exactly are they called the Chaos Dwarfs? Sure, they worship a god that might originate from the warp, but so do to the Skaven, and they don't seem to like connecting themselves to chaos. Furthermore, Hashit's objectives don't appear to be aligned with the four ruinous powers, as heavy industry and control does not scream chaos. Finally, the Dawizar are comfortable enough to enslave demons from the same gods to do their bidding, a great humiliation which usually involves demonic invasions or other punishments in the lore. Nevertheless, the Chaos Dwarves will happily join a Chaos Warrior army, at least when it comes to the Hell Canon. However, these lore inconsistencies are distracting. What exactly is the Dawizar's deal? And then he asks me to just kind of comment on something that I will comment about once I answer this question. So, the answer to this question is more about clarification than anything else. For a faction to be considered part of the Team Chaos, that means their origin comes from chaos in some shape or form. For instance, Skaven were created by many generations of rats being warped by consuming warpstone, which is the raw stuff of chaos. It's literally chaos, the energy of chaos made physically manifest, and eventually being fully evolved by the intervention of a mysterious figure at the doom of Kazvar that was likely the Horned Rat himself or perhaps Tzeentch. But the Horned Rat is a god of chaos, just as Hashit is. Both of them were born / came into existence because of the Great Incursion, and both of them reside within their own portions of the realm of chaos. As for aligned goals, remember chaos is constantly at war with itself. The forces of chaos are, well, chaotic, oftentimes random and pitted against one another for various reasons. The Chaos Dwarves hate the Skaven, for instance, but this is little different from how Nurgle and Tzeentch hate one another. One of the most fortunate aspects of chaos for everyone else is that it's incredibly fractious, and the various servants / children of chaos don't work well together. The end times is literally when the many forces of chaos set aside their differences and work together to bring about the end of the world, which creates an unstoppable tide of destruction that ultimately proved successful in the end times novels. As for demons themselves, the forces of chaos have no problem taking advantage of one another for their own benefit. All of the chaos races are selfish and greedy, Chaos Dwarves being one of the most extreme examples. They would gladly bind all of demonkind and even the chaos gods themselves if it meant more power just for them. But this is just like how warriors of chaos will often kill one another to prove themselves in the eyes of the dark gods, even if they share the same patron, or how Skaven will assassinate comrades to eliminate competition and move themselves further up the chain. These aren't lore inconsistencies, it's just that chaos is quite frankly a generally self-defeating force, and it covers a very broad spectrum. Chaos doesn't necessarily mean that you're under just the four major powers. Chaos means that you're under the tide of chaos, which there are thousands of chaos demons and gods. Many of the gods are minor, and maybe only a small village worships them, but because the village believes in them, they technically exist. Now, Tzeentch, Nurgle, Khorne, and Slaanesh are the most powerful, and they're the greatest powers, and one of the oldest. They're the four brothers. But the Horned Rat and Hashit are both also chaos gods who exist within the realm of chaos. And who knows, they might even be those gods in a disguise. They might be a facet of them. Of course, when we got into the end times, it was revealed that both Hashit and the Horned Rat were their own separate entities. But they're still chaos gods, and ultimately they're still part of that family, so to speak. As to your quick question about Warhammer 4th Edition for the RPG, I am extremely excited about it. I do intend on playing it. I do intend on featuring it heavily on the channel, and we're even hoping to do an event centered around its release with some other YouTubers. That'll be announced in due time when it's ready. I've heard a lot of rumors from some credible sources that it may be based on things that Games Workshop never really got to explore during Warhammer Fantasy's lifetime. So we might see expanded lore on the likes of Cathay, Nippon, Ind, the kingdoms of Koresh, Albion, and like all of the other, or Araby, like all the places that are really out there. Supposedly, 4th edition is going to not only feature the old world and the new world heavily, but also have at least an expansion dedicated to exploring completely new worlds, which could, of course, have a dramatic impact on the kind of content we see in Warhammer, Total War Warhammer 3. Hopefully that answers your question for now. We'll talk more about that closer to the release day. Moving on, Squats Forever asks, what are the relations between the Chaos Dwarves and the other races? I will go more into this later because there's a similar question that allows me to more easily get into detail, but long story short, the Chaos Dwarves think everyone else is inferior to them and deserve to suffer and die in their Hellforges. They don't like anyone else, they don't care for anyone else but themselves, and they are incredibly self-obsessed and greedy. They make the Dark Elves look vaguely altruistic, I'll put it that way. Jawal Lilu asks, if the Dawizar are being added into Total War, who would the Legendary Lords be? Okay, so I'm just going to go over the two of them and give a very brief description. We will talk about these guys more in the future, but here's what little pieces of what you need to know. The first one is Drazhoath the Ashen. He is the Lord of the Black Fortress. Essentially, he is a terrifying warrior wizard that is the lord of an elite outcast group of Chaos Dwarves. Because when Chaos Dwarves screw up, many of them are committed to something called the Infernal Guard. And most of the Infernal Guard are sent to serve at the Black Tower. And the Infernal Guard are kind of they're kind of the version of the Chaos Dwarf Slayers, but instead of being completely naked and seeking death, they basically have much of their armor. They have face masks like burned onto their face, and they don't get to take it off until they've redeemed themselves, essentially. And they are the most elite warrior guard of the Dawizar, and they're terrifying. And Drazhoath basically controls their fortress. On top of that, he rides a mount, which is a Great Taurus, which, if you don't know, Great and Bale Tauruses are these giant flying bull-like creatures, but they're much larger than bulls. And they're basically constantly covered in flame. They're almost more like fire elementals than anything else because there's so much fire and ash pouring off of them. And they're actually the elite hunter beast of the Darklands. Like they're the top of the hierarchy when it comes to dangerous creatures. And he rides one of the most powerful ones, which is a Great Taurus known as Cinder Breath. Drazhoath the Ashen featured very, very heavily as an important character, important playable special character during the Throne of Tarmakon event. So you can pick up that book and read all about him if you would like. The other one is Astragoth Ironhand, who was actually Drazhoath's master back before he was banished out of Zarnagrund. Astragoth is the greatest sorcerer of Zarnagrund. He is an ancient sorcerer prophet whose mastery over the lore of Hashut is unrivaled. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the lore of Hashut, it's an incredibly dangerous lore that's all about using ash, debilitating the enemy, blood sacrifice, and using the very magma beneath the earth as a weapon, which it has some terrifying results. In addition, much of Ironhand's body has turned to stone, thus he's incredibly difficult to harm, because dwarves were not designed by the old ones to use magic. They're actually quite resistant to it. So when they channel large amounts of magic through their bodies, one of the ways that it backfires when they lose control is that parts of their body will just turn to stone. It makes using magic for dwarves nearly suicidal, but the sorcerer prophets will continue to do it because the magic they use is so horrifically powerful, they're willing to risk turning completely to stone just to wield that power. And this guy is such a good sorcerer that he's managed to avoid turning completely to stone, but many of his limbs have turned to stone. But the plus side is it makes him very, very difficult to harm. He has also added numerous mechanical and runic augmentations to his body, which allows him to still move despite being made heavily of stone, and actually makes him terrifyingly dangerous in close combat. because he has a lot of augmentations to his body. You know, he's kind of like he almost has a mecha suit sort of thing. Kind of like you see with Ikit Claw, but designed by the horrific ingenuity and power of a Chaos Dwarf instead of a Skaven. So he would definitely be the racial leader, so to speak. You know, he's the Archaon or the Mazda Mundi of the Chaos Dwarves, and he's the big scary boss in their capital. But it would definitely be Astragoth Ironhand. Very, very powerful Chaos Dwarf sorcerer, and not someone to be messed with. Our next question comes from Evan Patricia, who asks, do you think CA will create new lore for the Chaos Dwarves by creating new units? And if so, what kind? Yes, I'm extremely certain that they are going to add to the Chaos Dwarf roster. Because while they have a pretty decent one from the Throne of Tarmakon campaign supplement and the Monstrous Arcanum supplement to the Storm of Magic, which are two different books. So the Monstrous Arcanum and the Throne of Tarmakon. If you put those two books together with all the Chaos Dwarf things in it, you can get a pretty decent army roster. However, the thing that the Chaos Dwarves really need is just more types of Chaos Dwarf infantry, like the actual dwarves. Currently, there's only 2 units, the Infernal Guard and Chaos Dwarf Warriors. That's it. So that part of the roster could really use some further expansion and creativity. Though I'm sure they'll create like weapon variants of those 2 groups because they have multiple weapon outfits. Still, you know, there's multiple Hobgoblin units. You've got your Chaos Dwarf Bull Centaurs, and then you've got the Kadai Fireborn and the Kadai Destroyer. Then you've got all the War Machines. Like, they have a lot of really cool things, but one thing their army could really use, I think, is just more Chaos Dwarves. So hopefully that's the biggest way we'll see the roster expanded. But when it comes to crazy scary monsters, especially with like the Iron Demon, the Chaos Siege Giant, and the Kadai Destroyer, I think they're perfectly covered in that category. They just need more basic infantry, I think, of the heavily armored variety. Moving on then, Natalie Hinsley asks, hi Mr. Sotek, are the Chaos Dwarves in decline like the other dwarves are? I imagine there weren't many to begin with, and they're probably fighting a lot of orcs and Skaven as well. I'd be interested in a little update on how they're doing during the era of Total War Warhammer. So actually, the answer might surprise you. The Chaos Dwarves are increasing in population over time, and their empire continues to grow at a steady rate. However, it's worth noting that the way the Chaos Dwarves accomplish this is by expanding very slowly and avoiding unnecessary wars. In addition, all of their citizens are incredibly well trained and covered head to foot in black iron plate armor. Toss in their habit to only use slaves in the forges and on the front lines of their armies instead of risking their own beards, and you have a recipe for steadily increasing populations. There is also another more sinister explanation, which is that the Dawizar care not how cruel an act is so long as it benefits them. It is noted by using rituals of Hashut in blood sacrifice and all sorts of other nasty things. The sorcerer prophets of Tsar Nagrand have supposedly found ways to force the creation or birth of more Chaos Dwarves and Bull Centaurs. All this said though, they do have a relatively tiny population, especially compared to other races. Steadily increasing. Always steadily increasing, but not numerous. They did, however, take a notable dip when the Chaos Dwarves were put to near extinction when the Grand Black Orc Rebellion happened that nearly collapsed their empire. That did put a bit of a dent in their population. But no, contrary to what you may think, they are actually growing in number. On to what I believe is the 11th question. Scion of the Emperor asks, who do the Dawizar have the closest relations with as a faction? Who are their allies? They're known to have strong ties with the Ironskin tribe of ogres, but do they have any close relations with any particular Norskin or Kurgan tribes or particular Chaos champions such as Tarmakon the Maggot Lord? So the answer to this is essentially, it's a bit long-winded. The Chaos Dwarves tend to keep most other races at an arm's length due to their untrusting nature and very strong belief of being vastly superior. That being said, Excellent work, Scion, in knowing that the Iron-Skinned tribe of ogres is indeed their ally in the Mountains of Morn, who give them a very steady supply of slaves in exchange for war machines, cannons, and lots of metal that they use to plate up their monsters, which gives the Ironskin one of the most terrifying monstrous cav contingents that can be found in the Ogre Kingdoms. Outside of that, they don't really have any true allies. Only races who have no qualms about trading them slaves in return for weapons, armor, and machines of destruction. The main faction who tends to barter with the Chaos Dwarfs is of course the Warriors of Chaos, many of whom acquire their legendary Chaos armor from the Dawizar themselves. In addition, they seek demon-bound weapons which can possess devastating power. They'll earn these by paying with slaves gathered all over the world and by allowing the Chaos Dwarfs to occasionally send powerful war machines with them to be tested on the open field, which is why in a horde of Chaos Warriors you may spy the odd group of Chaos Dwarfs manning a Hell Cannon, for instance. Other notable factions that trade frequently with them are the Hobgoblin Wolf Rider clans of the Darklands, the Ogre Kingdoms, that's where they tend to get a lot of their cannons like that Leadbelchers use and such from, and on the odd occasion they'll also trade with the larger Greenskin tribes. The only faction that the Chaos Dwarfs will not trade with in the Darklands is the Skaven, as the nefarious little buggers, especially Clan Rictus and Clan Skarier, tend to try and steal designs from the Chaos Dwarfs or commit sabotage by using the slaves they sell, by either making sure they're infected with the disease, or maybe there's an assassin hidden among them, and stuff like that. This has gotten to the point that Skaven offered as slaves, even by other factions, are just immediately sacrificed, fed to the cannibalistic bull centaurs, or just shot and killed on the spot. The Chaos Dwarves hate the Skaven, and they're, especially with Clan Skariah, their rivalry is to the point that both of them have often designed their war machines with self-destruct initiatives, that if someone tries to essentially take apart the machine and study it, it'll just explode and kill everyone around it. They do not like one another. So, but outside of them, most of the races in the Darklands who are not very, morally on the up and up, at least have a trade relationship with the Dark Elves, but I wouldn't say they have any allies. The Ironskin tribe is probably the closest thing they would have to allies. They will form pacts with individuals, which is when you see them marching out. A really good example of this is if you read the Gotrek and Felix books Road of Skulls. There's a Chaos Dwarf who's part of the Chaos Lord's army in that book, and there's a really detailed series of dialogue that explains why he's there and why he signs up with Chaos. And they're not friends. They're not even allies. It's just a business practice, essentially. Or it's more due to a pact. But you kind of get the idea, and that's the best book to kind of explain how the Chaos Dwarfs' relationships with friendly quote-unquote factions tends to be. And today's final question comes from Luke Arsegwell, who asks, "Hey, nice video. This format is good to have a quick overview, but I still want a longer vid in I think, relation to the Lore in 10 video. Just a quick question. Do we know the name of the Black Orc leader that rebelled?" So here's your answer. There isn't any indication that any one Black Orc was singularly in charge of the rebellion that nearly destroyed the Chaos Dwarfs. It didn't happen overnight, but rather packs of Black Orcs, as they spread and grew, began to bully other Greenskins into following their orders instead of the Chaos Dwarfs' orders. This basically snowballed out of control until the capital of Zar Nagrund was under siege, with the Chaos Dwarves' own war machines and weapons being used against them. That being said, the most powerful individual to have survived that siege, who we know was a central figure in the rebellion due to the artifacts he now wields, was none other than Grimgor Ironhide. He lost his missing eye sometime during that conflict or on his march from Zar Nagrun to the Old World, and was noted to have foul memories of the Dawizar's capital during the end times when he led his Wa with the combined might of the Ogre Kingdoms to wipe them all out once and for all. It's never explicitly stated that he was the leader of the rebellion, but it's likely that Grimgor Ironhide was a very, very important figure in the rebellion. There is one other Black Orc who was probably strongly of note, but he ended up dying much earlier. I can't remember what his name is off the top of my tongue, top of my head, so to speak. But he fought against. He tried to take the Mountains of Morn for like greenskin kind, and especially Black Orcs from Grease's Goldtooth. But Grease's Goldtooth ended up just like crushing him to death with his bare hands. So you can actually pick up the Ogre Kingdoms book and read through that story if you'd like. But no, there was not a credited single figure who led the rebellion. But if I had to point a finger, I'd be pointing it straight at old Grimgor Ironhide. So thanks everyone for watching this video. I hope you learned some interesting lore and got to know some fun little tidbits here and there. Alright, and that wraps up this Q&A video. Thanks everyone so much who asked questions. Sorry if I didn't get to yours today, but we collected questions from different YouTube videos, the Twitter, and the Discord, so you can ask anywhere there. So let's go ahead and talk about the next video. The patrons had a vote, which granted it was a little bit of a last minute vote, but ultimately the Tomb Kings managed to cinch out a quick victory. So next Sunday, because we're going to do Q&A Sundays, which kind of works, we're going to be doing a Q&A video on the Tomb Kings. So feel free to ask any question you want about the Tomb Kings either in the comment section below, on the Discord server, which the link to it will be in the description down below, in the Q&A section, or tweet me on Twitter. And I will try and answer all your questions. This ended up being a solid 30-minute video, so hope you guys enjoyed it. I do want to give a special shout out today to Michael and Sign of the Emperor, who are patrons who are kind of in the far and beyond category and have been looking out for me for a good while now, and I just wanted to personally call them out and thank them for their contributions to keeping me and this channel afloat. Without any further ado, thanks of course to the rest of my patrons as well, and I hope to see the rest of y'all soon for more content. Have a great day. Bye.